So a common question that I get asked a lot on this channel is, how do I shoot my YouTube videos on my iPhone? How is it that I'm using the iPhone to get the look that I have? Longtime followers of the channel will know that the iPhone has been my main camera of choice for shooting YouTube videos ever since I started this channel, which always seems to surprise people in the comments. So I like to think that I know a thing or two about shooting high quality videos on a smartphone. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be sharing my current setup along with all of the camera settings and the gear that I use. I'll also leave links to all of the products that I mentioned in this video in the description below. So when it comes to shooting videos on my iPhone, I'm currently using the iPhone 16 Pro Max with 256 gigabytes of storage. If you want to take the best looking videos on an iPhone, I would highly recommend having an iPhone 15 Pro or later, as these are currently the only iPhones capable of recording in Apple Log, which is the main camera setting that we're going to be using. Log is basically just a flat color profile that a lot of professional cameras will shoot in. It looks sort of weird at first, but the main benefit of shooting in Log is that it retains a lot more information in the highlights and shadows of your footage compared to regular SDR video, so you can color grade it to get the exact look and style that you want. Shooting in Log is also going to help remove a lot of the processing that Apple puts into its videos. I generally find that anytime I shoot in SDR, you can sort of tell that the footage has this sharp, over-processed look to it. I know some people out there like the sharpened look. However, for me personally, I think it looks a bit too unnatural. So if you want to shoot videos that have a more aesthetic and cinematic look to them, I would highly recommend shooting in Log if your phone supports it. Now, when it comes to shooting videos themselves, my current camera app of choice is the Blackmagic camera app, which is available as a free download from the App Store. The main reason that I use this app is because it gives you a lot more control over your exact camera settings compared to the regular camera app on the iPhone. And there's also a super useful feature called Remote Camera Control, which basically lets you mirror your iPhone's camera feed onto your iPad. So it effectively turns the iPad into a second monitor, and you can adjust all of your camera settings in real time directly from the iPad. So rather than me having to constantly go back and forth trying to readjust the height of the camera to make sure that I'm in frame, I can now do all of that directly from my iPad, which is right in front of me. When it comes to video format, as I mentioned before, I shoot all of my videos in 4K in the Apple Log format, which is what enables me to get the look that I have. And then in the Blackmagic camera settings app, I also have my codec set to Apple ProRes. So codec is basically like the format of the video, sort of similar to how you have JPEG and PNG for photos. I know there is some debate online as to which codec you should record your videos in. Most videos I've seen out there seem to recommend shooting your videos in the HEVC or H.264 format. And that's because the file sizes for HEVC are usually pretty small. Typically a 30-minute clip of A-roll shot in Apple ProRes will take up somewhere between 50 to 80 gigabytes of storage on my device, versus just a gigabyte when shot in HEVC. However, the big advantage you get with ProRes, and the reason that I shoot in it, is that it's a lot easier to edit in post, especially when you're dealing with clips that are longer than 10 minutes. Unfortunately, because of the way that HEVC compresses your footage, it makes it super painful and slow to edit sometimes. I've had instances in the past where a simple 12-minute video shot in HEVC has taken me over an hour to export. So this is definitely something to consider when deciding on your video format. If you're shooting something simple like 60-second reels for Instagram or TikTok, I think it makes sense shooting in HEVC so that you can save on the storage space. However, for longer form YouTube videos, stuff that's longer than 10 minutes, I personally would recommend shooting in ProRes because it's going to be a lot faster and easier to edit later on. When it comes to the exact camera settings I'm using, I have different settings depending on whether I'm shooting A-roll or B-roll. So A-roll is just the main clip of me talking to you right now that you see on camera. And I tend to shoot all of my A-roll footage at a frame rate of 24 frames per second using the main 1x lens. And generally, I'd recommend sticking to the 1x lens where possible, since this is going to offer you the best quality, both in terms of resolution and performance in low light environments. The main lens is the one that Apple's been refining the most over the years. So unless you really need to use the ultra wide or telephoto lenses to capture specific shots, I'd personally steer clear of them where possible. And then when it comes to taking B-roll shots, so these are the shots that you see on top of me talking. And for these shots, I like to set my frame rate to either 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, which is what enables me to get that smooth, stable, slow motion effect. Frame rate, for those of you who don't know, is basically the number of frames that your camera is able to capture in any given second. So if I move my hand from here to here, that's almost like 2 frames per second. Whereas if I move my hand from here to here to here to here to here, that's like 10 frames per second. And you can see like there's a much smoother effect compared to if I just go from here to here. And you'll often see that if you try to slow down a 24 FPS clip, the footage looks really laggy and jittery. And that's because we've simply not captured enough frames into the shot. Whereas taking the exact same shot at 60 FPS and slowing that down gives us a much smoother clip. Generally speaking, 24 FPS is considered to be the sort of gold standard when it comes to taking cinematic looking videos on YouTube. There are some creators like Marcus Brownlee who prefer to shoot in 30 FPS, so maybe experiment with both and see which look you prefer. Just remember that you will likely need to increase your camera's exposure to let in more light when shooting at those higher frame rates. For the shutter speed, you ideally want to have this set to double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you'll have your shutter speed set to 1/48. Similarly, if you're shooting in 60 frames per second, you'll want to have your shutter speed set to 1/120. Next up, we have our ISO. This basically affects how much light is able to enter your camera's sensor and therefore the brightness of our footage. Now, the exact ISO that you should use is going to depend very heavily on your lighting conditions. Generally, the rule of thumb is that you'll want to keep your ISO as low as possible because shooting at higher ISO values can often introduce more noise into your footage, which makes your video look quite grainy and overexposed. However, obviously, if you set your ISO way too low, your video is just going to be too dark to see, and you may end up losing some detail in the shadows. So it's a bit of a balancing act. If it helps, I usually have my ISO set between 80 and 100 when I'm shooting at 24 FPS, and then I'll have it set to 200 if I'm shooting at 60 FPS, and about 3 to 400 when I'm shooting at 120 FPS. But again, like I say, the exact values that you should be using are going to depend very heavily on your lighting conditions and the rest of your setup. So my best advice would be to experiment with different ISO settings until you get a look that you're happy with. Next up, we have our white balance. So this is basically like the temperature of our footage. So shooting at a higher white balance will give our video a warmer look, whereas shooting at a lower temperature will give it a cooler look. For my videos, I typically lock my white balance in at around 5200 Kelvin. Generally, it's recommended that you match your temperature to the temperature of the light source that you're using. So if you're using the sun outdoors as your main light source, I think the sun has a temperature of like 5600 Kelvin. Personally, I like to give my footage a slightly cooler look, hence why I use a lower white balance. But I am technically breaking this rule of thumb by doing that. You can also play around with the tint and the focus as well, although I typically have both of these features set to auto. In terms of other settings I would recommend changing, one thing that I always like to do is enable the 3x3 grid and level bar. I find these just help me to properly frame my subjects in different shots. And then when it comes to finally shooting the videos themselves, I have my iPhone mounted to this MagSafe tripod that a company called CraftGeek kindly sent over to me. At some point, I would like to upgrade to a slightly more professional tripod, one that ideally lets you capture overhead shots as well. But for now, this one does the job of mounting my phone quite nicely. I find that the MagSafe attachment makes it super easy and convenient to use. Plus, with this tripod, you do also get some flexibility in adjusting the angle and the orientation of your iPhone, which does actually come in handy when I'm trying to take moving B-roll shots. When it comes to lighting, the main light that I'm using is this key light from Newer, and boy is this light bright. I'm currently shooting this video at just 24% brightness, and you can see that it's more than bright enough to light up my entire space and my face. You can also adjust settings like the brightness, temperature, and the angle of the light. However, what I've also done is I've placed a 65 centimeter softbox on top of the light, and I've added in a honeycomb grid. So the softbox is what enables me to get that soft lighting effect onto my face, which I find just offers a much more pleasing look to the eye. I find that iPhone cameras generally don't tend to respond that well to very harsh lighting sources. I think it's due to how small their sensors are. So having a softbox is definitely something I'd recommend. And then I have my light positioned in front of me at a sort of 45-degree angle. And this ensures that only I'm being lit up and that the rest of my space can remain dark. That's just the look that I prefer for my videos. And then I have everything mounted onto a light stand, which is also from Newer. Overall, this setup cost me about £300 or dollars, which actually isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. And it's especially beneficial because living in the UK, the lighting conditions are constantly changing throughout the day, so I don't really want to be relying on natural lighting for my videos, which is why I typically like to shoot in darker rooms. In fact, you can see behind me that I recently purchased the set of twist-to-go blackout blinds from Sevilla just to block out any daylight into my setup. One area that's also worth touching on is storage. So because I am shooting everything in Apple ProRes, the file sizes that I'm dealing with are pretty large. So because of that, I like to record all of my videos straight onto an external SSD. So everything gets shot straight onto the SSD instead of my phone storage, which means that I don't have to worry about transferring loads of large files afterwards. The SSD I'm currently using is this 2TB drive from Lexa, but plenty of other SSDs will also work too. The only thing to note when it comes to SSDs is that you'll want to avoid drives that require more than 4.5 watts of power to work. So basically external drives, like most of their accessories, do require a certain amount of power in order for them to work. But because the iPhone can only output 4.5 watts of power to other devices, if you have an SSD that requires more power, the drive actually might not properly register on your phone. You'll also want to make sure that you're using a cable with USB 3.0 speeds or better. Anything slower, and again, the drive might not properly register on your phone. Unfortunately, the cables that come in the iPhone box don't support these speeds, so you will need to use a different cable from the one that Apple gives you. The cable I'm currently using is this $20 Thunderbolt 4 cable from Anker, which transfers data at 40 gigabits per second. Then when it comes to audio, I feel like I've gone through a lot of different microphones over the past 2 years. Currently, the one I'm using right now is the Shure MV7 Plus. Admittedly, it is a pretty expensive mic, but I think the quality is so good that it's one of those mics that you can buy once and use for up to 10 years. And then when it comes to doing unboxings and more sort of casual videos, I do also have this wireless microphone from DJI. I think if you're just getting started with YouTube, this is actually a pretty good microphone recommendation because it strikes a good balance between quality and affordability. And the nice thing about both of these mics is that they connect straight to my MacBook via USB-C, allowing me to record audio straight into the Voice Memos app. So you can see that I'm not using any sort of fancy audio recorders or transmitters. I probably should be, but I don't. Mainly because I can't really be bothered to mess around with those kinds of settings at this stage. You know, ideally I'd like to just sit down and hit record on my phone without having to mess around with tons of different settings. And then once everything has been shot, I'll edit my video on my M1 MacBook Air. Now I personally wouldn't recommend picking up an M1 MacBook Air just for video editing, since it is starting to show its age now. And I am planning to eventually upgrade to a MacBook Pro once Apple switches them to OLED. However, if this is the only machine that you can afford, you can definitely get by with it to begin with. I personally edit all of my videos inside of Final Cut Pro. There are of course other video editing tools like DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro. I know that CapCut is becoming quite popular amongst newer creators. However, I personally find that Final Cut Pro just has a more intuitive design, especially with its magnetic timeline, which lets you quickly stitch clips together. Plus it's also a one-time fee, so you don't have to mess around with monthly subscriptions. Usually the first thing I'll do when editing is I'll sync up my audio and video using the Synchronize Clips tool. This just saves me having to line everything up myself. And obviously because I've shot everything onto an SSD, I can just connect the drive straight to my MacBook and edit off of that. Once the syncing is done, I'll then begin to color correct my clip to get the look that I want. And I have a couple of presets that I use. I don't quite know how to share this because it's not actually a LUT or anything. It's just a series of color wheels and curves that I've added to make it look more like a normal image. But once I've color corrected, I'll then add my own custom LUT to get the look that you see in my videos. I'll leave a link to my LUTs in the description if anyone is interested. But yeah, all the LUT is doing is it's boosting the contrast and adding some teal to the shadows and orange to the highlights, whilst making the reds pop a little bit more. And yeah, if you see the before versus after, it's pretty incredible that we were able to shoot this image on a smartphone. Like, I think it just goes to show how good smartphone cameras have gotten. And obviously Apple are always adding new features to the camera on the iPhone each year, so you can expect that things will only get better from here. So that's a quick overview of my current setup right now. It's obviously changing from time to time, and I am constantly making upgrades to the setup, but hopefully this video provides you with some inspiration on ways you can shoot high quality videos on your iPhone. Make sure to leave a like if it did, follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe for the next one.